Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Atin, and I work with Center for Science and Environment, or CSE. This webinar is being co-hosted by GRID-Arendal, Norway, the Norwegian Institute for Water Research, NIVA, and CSE. Before I leave the floor to a pool of celebrated practitioners, let me give a very quick context to this webinar. As we all know, the whole world is grappling with plastic pollution, with about 430 million tons of plastic being produced each year, and about 10% of it is being recycled globally. It was evident that addressing the scale of the plastic pollution called for an urgent global action. The United Nations Environment Assembly, as a governing body of UNEP, or the United Nations Environment Program, was formed in 2012 to discuss and resolve the most pressing global environmental challenges. UNEA is the world's highest level decision-making body on environmental governance, with membership of all the 193 member states. On the 2nd March 2012, the UNEA adopted the historic resolution 5/14 in a meeting which was basically marked as UNEA 5.2 meeting in Nairobi, Kenya, which also happens to be the global headquarters of UNEP. The main proponent of this resolution was Rwanda and Peru, and which was also strongly supported by the European Union, India, Kenya, Norway, and other member states. Under this resolution 5/14, the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, or as we know them as INC, was formed, and it was tasked to develop an international legally binding global plastic treaty by 2024. The resolution 5/14 covers the full life cycle of plastics, which is how it is very different from traditionally the way we looked at plastic pollution. So it essentially covers production, design, disposal, and all the rest of it, to tackle environmental health, economic issues, and its impacts. Between November 2022 and December 2024, the INC met 5 times. In this webinar, we will discuss and try to demystify the process, the elements, and what's at stake as we are heading to the 2nd session of the 5th INC, technically known as the INC 5.2, scheduled between August 5 to 14 in Geneva, Switzerland. As I mentioned earlier, today we are joined by a pool of celebrated practitioners, and we'll introduce them all as we invite them to speak. Let me also quickly share the structure of this webinar. We'll start with a small session on the brief context of the INC process and why INC 5.2 is so important. We'll then have 2 panel discussions. The first panel will deliberate on the focus areas of INC 5.2, and the second panel will reflect on what's at stake. After both the panels, we'll open up the floor for questions from all of you to the speakers and panelists. So I request you to start posting your questions, ideally in the question and answer box, so that it is easier for us to pick up. Let me now quickly introduce Eva Ruchecka, the first speaker of the day from GRID-Arendal, who will basically present a brief context of the INC 5.2. But before I do that, let me quickly share my screen. I hope my screen is, I'm so sorry. Is it visible to all of you?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So the first speaker is Eva Ruchecka. Like I said, Eva is a chemist and environmental engineering graduate from Latvian University. She works at GRID-Arendal, focusing on pollution issues in emerging economics and developing countries like the Balkans, South Caucasus, and Central Asia. She has extensive practical experience in environmental and cross-discipline problems, introducing environmental crime and security. Eva's work involves applied research, field trips, developing new methods, and communicating with stakeholders. She also implements capacity building training programs with governments and non-governmental organizations. The results are often used in environmental assessment reports or innovative communication products. Thank you so much, Eva. You have the floor now, and you roughly have about 10 minutes to present. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And first of all, good morning and good afternoon to all participants of this webinar. Thank you, Atin, for introducing me. Yes, I'm working for GRID-Arendal, and the GRID-Arendal mostly work in the science policy interface. So this work is very relevant to our organization, and we do quite a lot of support for the process in general. The work on this endeavor, as you mentioned already, began in late 2022 with the committee Inc. scheduled 5 meetings from then and to 2024 in the hope that by the end of this period, all nations would agree on a new treaty. The point of departure in 2022 was clearly plastic pollution, including in the marine environment. However, with a growing body of scientific evidence and comprehensive analysis widely available, it became very clear that plastics as a material embedded in nearly every aspect of our daily lives, from cars to airplanes to toothbrushes and toothpastes, make the scope of this work more comprehensive. The goods and services that plastics enable have a full life cycle that impacts the environment not only through littering but also through greenhouse gas emissions, thereby contributing to climate change. It is a matter of human health. It is also a matter of our changing cultures, as traditional ways of doing things are clearly replaced by plastic substitutes. The comprehensivity of this issue, from production through consumption, waste management, and pollution, combined with diverse interests of various stakeholder groups, has resulted in a vivid, sleepless, and highly political negotiation process. This process formed various like-minded groups. The 2-year negotiation process, which culminated in Busan at ING 5.1, did not deliver a final outcome that would allow negotiators to leave the room with good news. Instead, the designated representatives agreed to convene at ING 5.2 in Geneva, which is scheduled in few weeks' time. For some, and perhaps many, this was a disappointing outcome. However, one key achievement in Busan was the agreement to base future discussion on the chair text issued on December 1st, 2024. This is a 22-page document containing 32 articles. This document has moved away from previous versions that contain thousands of square brackets, indicating disagreement on almost on all issues. Despite criticism about inclusiveness and transparency in the preparation of the chair text voiced by some delegates and many disappointed stakeholders in the conference center in Busan, the document represents considerable progress in the negotiation process. It also outlines the red line issues. There are some positive points and alignments. The chair text indicates alignment on the substantial issues from the plastic life cycle. These are the issues such as plastic production design, Article 3, and waste management, Article 8. Alignments are also found on plastics, including microplastics, releases and leakages in Article 7, which addresses measures related to issues such as pellets and fishing gears. Article 8 on waste management outlines various measures, including setting objectives and targets at the national level for collecting and recycling, which is a very positive outcome. However, this article overlaps with the Basel Convention, which already promotes environmentally sound waste management. Therefore, agreement on waste management doesn't represent a substantial breakthrough. The chair text highlights many substantial issues where positions remain far apart. Issues such as production of primary plastic polymers, sustainable consumption, plastic products, and chemicals of concern remain highly contested. Regarding chemicals of concern, 95 countries supported the statement read by Mexico, calling for the inclusion of list of such chemicals in the new agreement. Should the new convention pursue its provisional goal of protecting human health and the environment, chemicals of concern, including unnecessary chemicals, should become a focus of its main provisions. Regarding sustainable production and consumption, which is addressed in parts in Article 6, the issue in general has been approached from a circular economy perspective, which, as we know, is largely insufficient to reach any sustainability. It is important to note that sustainable production and consumption were included in UNEA resolution from the outset, when the resolution was adopted in 2022. Should the scope of the new convention follow the resolution as a guiding star for the negotiation, as it was mentioned by Inge Andersen, the text of the convention must have a clear objectives, scopes, and principle, aiming to reach sustainable consumption and production of plastic products. Limited progress was also made on financial issues, particularly on how to mobilize funds to cover the risks and raising costs of waste management and remediation. Despite the disagreements and challenges in the negotiation process, it is important to maintain high ambition in governing plastic-related issues by supporting negotiators during the interim negotiation sessions, just as we are doing in this webinar. There will be more information about specific topics later on, and I have mentioned only a few sticking points and invite the following speakers to expand on the focus areas for INC 5.2. So over to you, Atin, to coordinate the next interventions.
Thank you so much, Eva, for the wonderful overview. It's time to start the first panel. In the first panel, the first panelist that we have is Thomas Mice from GRID-Arendal. Unfortunately, Thomas couldn't be with us physically because of some other commitment. Let me quickly introduce Thomas before I run the recorded presentation. I hope my screen is visible to all of you.
Yes.
All right. So Thomas Mice is a senior scientist in GRID-Arendal. Thomas, originally from Brussels, has a diverse educational background, including pre-MBA civil engineering, terrestrial, and marine biology. He began his career as an environmental manager for Jan de Yule, leading large development projects. He later became a principal scientist at the Center for Environment, Fisheries, and Aquaculture Science, CFAS, in UK. Leading marine experts and projects. He completed his PhD on marine litter at the University of Amsterdam. Thomas was a member of committees and working groups. He was appointed UK specialist on pollution in the marine environment. He coordinated marine monitoring progress for EU directives and regional drivers, gaining extensive knowledge of international environmental institutes and organizations. Thomas provided direct advice to UK government on issues related to human pressures, supporting UK ministers and royals at international meetings. He chaired and facilitated working groups, committees, and political debates, bridging the gap between science and policy while building a global network. So Thomas is basically going to talk about the key issues connected to the primary plastic polymers, chemicals of concern, problematic plastic products, and financing mechanisms. So we have a recorded presentation from Thomas, which I'm going to run now. And I request colleagues to confirm whether the screen is visible.
I'm Dr. Thomas Maes, and I'm a senior scientist at GRID-Arendal. I'm going to talk to you today about the status of some of the key issues in this INC 5.2 primer webinar. Unfortunately, I can't be with you in person, so this is going to be an online recording. The key issues I will try to condense into this short presentation are going to be the issues around primary plastic polymers, chemicals of concern, problematic plastic products, and financial mechanisms. As you might know, there are some other key issues, but these might be focused on in other presentations, and for the sake of time, I will stay to these four. So the first one, primary plastic polymers. Most of you might know it as putting caps on virgin resin production. We know that there has been over 100 countries which have supported negotiating a global cap or reduction target for primary plastic production. This was highlighted through the Bridge to Busan, where support and proposals like the 40 by 40 initiative or cutting 40% by 2040 have been proposed. It received quite some opposition from some of the like-minded countries or fossil fuel producing nations. These are, for example, Saudi Arabia, the US, Kuwait, and India. And it led to a deadlock at INC 5 in Busan because these countries argued that plastic production itself is outside the scope of the Global Plastics Treaty. In terms of chemicals of concern, these are the toxic additives and polymers. We know there is widespread recognition of the need to phase out harmful chemicals which are present in plastic products, and there are between 94 and 140 states, depending on how wide we will take this recognition, which have backed this up in INC 5 draft texts. However, again, no final consensus has been reached yet, and thousands of chemical substances are unregulated globally. The treaty language, however, is still unclear on this topic. In terms of problematic and avoidable plastic products, there is some broad support for banning or phasing out single-use and unnecessary items. These are, for example, food packaging in some cases, plastic bags, and these concepts are quickly rising in the draft, but the text is still in brackets and it's unresolved due to disagreements in terms of the scope and timelines to implement these bans or phasing out of these single-use and unnecessary items. In terms of financial mechanisms, this has been recognized, and in INC 4, expert groups have been set up to discuss funding models and implementation mechanisms. We saw some progress in INC 5 in terms of advanced legal review and technical input around these concepts, but again, no final decision on how to fund the treaty implementation, the required technology transfer, or compensation to developing countries have been finalized. It thus remains a high-stakes, unresolved issue because, as we all know, without a good financial mechanisms, the treaty risks having difficulties to be implemented. In short, this is the overview of these four key issues. So primary polymers or production caps, there's been strong support from 100+ states. This has been blocked by fossil fuel producers. In terms of the chemicals of concern, there has again been broad support, but the text is still bracketed. In terms of the problematic products, this is agreed in principle, but it's unresolved in terms of the details and the scope and the timelines to kind of tackle these problematic products. And the financial mechanisms, there is some expert work underway, but the treaty text is still silent on how this actually will materialize. So what are some of the next steps and the overall context? Well, INC 5 in Busan, which happened from the 25th of November till the 1st of December 2024, ended without a deal. As it was kind of stated, there is nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, and therefore it will reconvene at INC 5.2 in Geneva, which will happen from the 5th till the 14th of August 2025. There's going to be some negotiations and discussions around production caps, chemical controls, problematic products, and these funding mechanisms. And so negotiations will continue because at the moment there is no consensus mechanism beyond full consensus, which is currently resisted, of course, by several oil-producing states. There are some strong advocates for these kind of legally binding phase out, some of the production caps, and these are, for example, the EU, the High Ambition Coalition, and many Global South countries and NGOs. However, some of the industry-influenced delegations prioritize recycling and waste management, so end of the life cycle, compared to the more upstream decisions. What is important? Well, in my opinion, aligning national and regional efforts across the full plastic life cycle are going to be very important. A source-to-sea approach. There are different national and regional variations in addressing plastic production, plastic usage, waste management, and pollution, of course. And this creates challenges for agreeing on a set of globally unifying objectives, targets, and measures in the Global Plastics Treaty. While a strong global ambition overarching framework for action is needed, it is also equally important to incorporate some flexibility to reflect these diverse regional and national needs and priorities. Therefore, in my opinion, regions, which could include extended river basements, catchment areas, and regional seas, should be recognized as critical units of analysis and action. Because by considering these geographically and hydrologically defined areas, which are crucial for source-to-sea management of plastic pollution and effectively reducing the plastic flows within and beyond spatial and national boundaries, we can actually kind of look at these units as some small little building blocks towards a global treaty. Because it will enable an establishment of regional, national, and local priorities, targets, and measures, which can then contribute to achieve the global ambition and framework of action which will be established by the Global Plastics Treaty. So this source-to-sea approach, taking this approach provides actually a framework for recognizing how actors and stakeholder groups and their interests relate to reducing plastic pollution within river catchment areas and regional seas, as well as those involved in that life cycle of plastic products. There is no one-size-fits-all solution, and therefore, to adequately address plastic pollution, some aspects of the GPT implementation can require some approaches which are tailored to these more specific regional and local contexts. National, regional, and local consultation and participation processes become more essential for developing these context-specific targets, priorities, and measures. And this, of course, helps to build a global plastics treaty in the end. What is the outlook for INC 5.2, which is happening in August 2025? Well, there will be a focus on resolving the brackets, which are currently covering production caps, chemical bans, product bans, and financial support. We're going to have to watch out for some key updates on the consensus procedure and potential voting thresholds if full consensus fails. And it will also be very critical how finance and implementation obligations are framed for developing nations. A lot is going to happen in these next weeks, let's say. I would like to thank you for your attention. My email is thomas.mace@grida.no. You can also find a lot more information on the GRID-Arendal website, where we have some specific projects which have focused on the Global Plastics Treaty. A good example is AfriPack, where you can find quite some nice knowledge products and information documents in terms of these key issues and potential decisions that can be made around those. I'd like to thank you again for your attention, and I wish you a great day. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, many thanks to Thomas for this overview on the issues of primary plastic polymers, chemicals of concern, problematic plastics, etc. The next panel that I would like to bring in is Amy. But before I leave the floor to Amy, let me also quickly introduce her for all the participants. So Amy is working as a research scientist with NIVA, the Norwegian Institute for Water Research. Amy Nokkelberg is a research scientist at the Norwegian Institute for Water Research, NIVA, with a background in international environmental governance and development studies. Her research focuses on just transitions in the context of informal recycling systems and global effort to end plastic pollution, including the ongoing plastic treaty process. So thank you so much, Amy, for joining us. I would request you to reflect upon the issue of just transition and how it is positioned in the overall process of negotiation so far. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Atin, and thank you everyone for being here with us today. So in this presentation, I want to reflect on how the concept of just transition is evolving in the Global Plastics Treaty process and how it relates to the lived realities and stakeholder priorities across the plastics lifecycle. And by taking this lifecycle perspective, I hope to approach just transition not only as a standalone provision, but as a cross-cutting principle embedded in the treaty scope and operational articles. And in this context, a just transition may be understood as ensuring that measures taken to end plastic pollution are fair, equitable, and inclusive for all stakeholders across the plastics lifecycle by safeguarding livelihoods and communities impacted by plastic pollution and corresponding control measures. And since the adoption of UNEA Resolution 514, the notion of just transition has moved from being an implicit idea linked to sustainable development and equity towards a more explicit, though still contested, element of treaty deliberations. Early in the process, just transition was centered towards the informal waste sector, especially waste pickers who have played a key role in bringing the concept onto the agenda through sustained advocacy and stakeholder engagement. Their contributions were perhaps most clearly reflected in the INC2 options paper, which proposed just transition as a possible core obligation with concrete measures for inclusion, recognition, and improved working conditions in the informal waste sector. And at INC3, just transition appeared as a standalone article in the zero draft text, as well as in relation to EPR and national plans. State and observer interventions across the INCs have reflected varied interpretations of the concept, linking it to human rights, equity, access to information, and common but differentiated responsibilities. Many have emphasized the need for tailored support for developing countries through finance, capacity building, and technology transfer. And in the most recent chair's text that will be negotiated at INC 5.2, just transition is framed as a means to take into account national circumstances and development priorities, with the aim of ensuring no one is left behind. Responsibility for implementation is placed with national governments, and the text identifies a wide range of affected groups, from informal and formal workers and waste pickers to small-scale fishers, indigenous peoples, MSMEs, women, children, and local communities. And while this broad framing allows for flexibility, it also leaves much open to interpretation. And the operational details of just transition remains open, with future clarification likely to come through implementation frameworks, national plans, and COP decisions. And this lack of clarity is compounded by limited transparency and participation in the negotiations. At INC 5.1, observers were largely excluded from contact groups and informal meetings, with few opportunities to contribute substantially. Closed-door discussions and space constraints undermine the legitimacy of the process and limits the integration of diverse knowledge, lived experience, and independent scientific input. And as highlighted by the Scientist Coalition and IPEN, for example, this may lead to weaker, less inclusive outcomes and potentially unintended harms. Ultimately, the credibility and the equity of the treaty will depend not only on its final wording, but also on how it's negotiated, including who is able to participate, contribute, and be heard. And this is especially relevant for just transition, which by definition requires inclusive governance and meaningful involvement of those most affected. And building on how just transition has emerged in the treaty discussion, it's helpful to recall its broader justice roots, originating in labor struggles and expanding to encompass social and environmental equity across sectors and scales. Key justice questions in this regard includes who participates and under what conditions, whose knowledge counts, how benefits and burdens are distributed, and whether historical harms are addressed or ignored. These justice considerations cut across all stages of the plastics life cycle and shape what a just transition requires. And a life cycle lens helps us explore how these questions play out across different stages of the plastics life cycle. Upstream, fossil fuel extraction and polymer production often take place on or near indigenous lands and in low-income areas, where communities face pollution, land loss, and health risks, raising concerns about environmental injustice, land rights, and intergenerational harm. Midstream, justice concerns include chemical exposures from plastic products, such as packaging, textiles, personal care items, and plastics used for food production. And these widespread hazards raise issues of health equity, consumer protection, and access to information. Downstream, waste workers recover discarded plastics, often under unsafe and insecure conditions, without recognition, protective equipment, and basic services. Communities living near unsanitary landfills and poorly regulated recycling facilities face exposure to hazardous emissions in air, water, and soil. Downstream also includes fisherfolk and coastal communities whose health and livelihoods are affected by marine plastic pollution. These exposures intersect with broader social inequalities related to caste, class, gender, religion, and migration. And a just transition must respond to these differentiated burdens through concrete provisions, dedicated resources, and inclusive governance mechanisms. Taking a life cycle perspective, we see that these justice concerns are not only confined to the Just Transition article, but other key articles have significant implications for justice and equity. Article 5 on plastic product design is central, as the design decisions determine not only the circularity and safety, but also who bears the risks and costs associated with hazardous plastic products. Embedding criteria for traceability, transparency, safety, and sustainability at the design stage can help redistribute risks more fairly, moving responsibility upstream and reducing harms to those currently most exposed. Article 6 on sustainable production and consumption of primary plastic polymers has the potential to align global efforts with environmental and climate commitments, ensuring a just transition towards a circular plastics economy and protect human and environmental health. Article 8 on plastic waste management could play a key role in protecting both formal and informal workers. Civil society and waste picker groups have called for rights-based systems that offer legal recognition, social protection, and safety guarantees to ensure a just transition under this provision. Article 11 on financial mechanisms is critical for implementation, as it determines who has the resources to participate in and benefit from plastic reduction efforts across the life cycle. Organizations such as Tear Fund, the International Alliance of Waste Pickers, and others have warned that without targeted, accessible, and equitable financing, informal workers, grassroots organizations, and marginalized communities risks being excluded and further marginalized under financial mechanisms. Article 19, currently proposed as a dedicated provision on health, offers an opportunity to address the differentiated health impacts of plastics, including exposure to hazardous chemicals, microplastics, and air pollution. A just transition lens highlights the need to protect those most exposed, framing health risks not only as a technical challenge, but as matters of equity, environmental justice, and rights. These examples show how justice is embedded across the treaty, underscoring the value of a holistic approach to support inclusive outcomes and a just transition across the plastics lifecycle. Civil society stakeholders bring distinct justice concerns to the negotiation table, ranging from recognition and redress to equity in health, finance, and access. While their priorities may differ, they often converge in calling for transitions that are inclusive, rights-based, and community-led. Recognizing these intersecting perspectives is essential, but just as important is ensuring that they have a real role in shaping how solutions are designed and delivered. A future treaty should support meaningful participation, not only in the negotiations, but also through implementation, for example, through sector-specific guidelines, working groups, and national plans. And as we approach INC 5.2, I hope these reflections can support continued dialogue on how just transition is defined, operationalized, and made meaningful. Much remains to be negotiated, but ensuring that diverse voices are not only heard, but centered will be key to delivering more inclusive, just, and effective outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was really insightful. Let me now bring in the next speaker, Swati Sambial. And before I invite Swati, let me also quickly introduce her. So Swati is a principal expert for pollution at GRID-Arendal, where she leads work on plastic pollution, circular economy, and just transition. As part of her work, she supports Africa and Asia Pacific region in developing inclusive data-driven strategies for plastic and marine litter reduction. Swati is a recognized voice in the global plastic treaty process and advocates for an equitable, community-led just solutions to environmental challenges. With over 14 years of experience, he brings technical and policy expertise from roles with UN Habitat, UNEP, World Bank, University of Georgia, and the Center for Science and Environment. Thank you so much for joining us today, Swati. I request you to just reflect on the 3 key issues that basically are also going to be discussed, which are technology transfer, capacity building, and national plans.
Thank you so much, Atin, and I promise to use my time very judiciously. So I've been asked to share briefly about Article 12 and 14, and this comes straight from the chair's text that was released on 1st December 2024 and would be up for discussion in Geneva. Article 12 broadly highlights capacity building, technical assistance, and technology transfer, including international cooperation. As a part of this article, developed countries must provide timely and appropriate support to developing countries for implementing the treaty obligations, which are determined and agreed upon jointly. I think that's really crucial. The support includes capacity building, technical assistance, and safe technology transfer. And I feel while this will happen or will happen as we proceed, it should keep into account the local, subnational, as well as national realities of various countries. All efforts must be country-driven and responsive to nationally determined needs and priorities. Also, there are diverse pathways for delivery of support. Implementation can be through regional, sub-regional, and national arrangements, including existing centers. And there is, it encourages cooperation through multilateral and bilateral means, or North-South, South-South, and triangular cooperation. With the inclusion of private sector, indigenous people, local governments, and other important stakeholders that are a part of the plastics value chain. Talking about innovation and technological advancement, parties need to facilitate technology, development, transfer, and diffusion, especially to developing countries. Of course, the text talks about research and innovation from developed to developing, but as you can see, the highlight should be, there should be decent amount of cross-pollination, and it should flow across countries, developed countries to invest in and promote research, innovation, and scientific cooperation, while keeping into account the local, national, as well as regional research, and support environmentally sound and innovative solutions, keeping into account the local realities. This is very important and somewhere been missed in defining these article and should be really emphasized upon. In terms of institutional mechanisms and future guidance, cooperation with intergovernmental organizations and scientific bodies is key. This should ideally also include the academia and science centers based within countries. a cooperation mechanism to be established to guide implementation, and the COPs will define modalities in terms of reference for enhancing support, special attention to the needs of LDCs, SIDS, landlocked and coastal African states, MICs, and transition economies. Moving ahead to national plans, and Article 14 specifically talks about it. But before I do that, what are national plans? A national plastic roadmap or strategy or plan, it's a strategic framework designed to guide countries in addressing plastic pollution effectively and systematically. It aims to outline clear and actionable steps to achieve the fundamental objectives and goals of global agreement on plastic pollution. It's also there to raise political awareness and preparedness to adopt robust national plastic policies at national level, ensuring stakeholder buy-in and policy alignment. Also promote institutional coordination across sectors, fostering collaboration to tackle the multifaceted challenges that are there due to plastic pollution, and also to enhance access to financial and technical support, enabling countries to implement guided sustainable solutions and scale up impactful, replicable initiatives. As I said, Article 14 highlights about the national plans, and of course, there's more to it than is mentioned in the text. Each party shall or may develop a national plan based on national circumstances, outlining actions and measures to implement the convention. These plans must be submitted to the COP via the Secretariat within a specified period after the convention enters into force for that party. Updates to national plans shall be made periodically, aligned with guidelines adopted under Para 6, and national plans are to be developed in consultation with domestic and local stakeholders to ensure ownership and inclusivity. Effective implementation by developing countries hinges on the means of implementation, as is defined in Article 11, which is finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. The Secretariat will ensure national plans are publicly accessible, enhancing transparency and accountability. And the COP at its first meeting will establish various modalities and guidelines for these plans, also provide technical guidance or harmonized approach to aid the implementation of the national plans. Before I end, also wanted to highlight that GRID-Arendal has specifically done a lot of work with partners such as UNEP, and also as a part of the AfriPac project with IUCN that Thomas highlighted before, where we have worked with over 20 plus countries in generating the first level of data on plastics across its life cycle. And I feel this data also would be instrumental for countries when they'll go ahead in developing their national plans. I'll stop here, Atin, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Swati. Let me now bring in my next speaker, which is Siddharth. And before Siddharth makes the intervention, let me quickly introduce him. Siddharth is the program manager at the Center for Science and Environment. An engineer by training, he holds a master's degree in green technology from the Institute of Chemical Technology, Mumbai. With nearly a decade of experience in the solid waste management sector, Siddharth previously co-founded a social enterprise dedicated to organic waste management in Mumbai. At CSE, he works with the Solid Waste Management and Circular Economy Unit, primarily focusing on plastic pollution. Siddharth has been involved in several government committees contributing to policy development on plastic waste management and circularity at national and state levels. He leads CSE's initiatives on plastic, overseeing research, advocacy, and capacity building efforts. He has been following the Global Plastic Treaty since the open-ended working group meeting in Dakar, Senegal, before the INC process started. So, Siddharth, thank you for joining us today. As we all know that the rules of procedure plays a very critical role in decision-making in any multilateral environmental agreement or negotiation process that way. And please also reflect on how do you see this thing influencing or affecting the Conference of Parties and subsidiary bodies going forward in INC 5.2. Over to you, Sid.
Yeah, thank you so much, Atin. I hope I'm audible and you can see my screen.
Yes.
So basically, thank you to all the previous speakers. They set a very good context in terms of what really happened over the course of the last 5 meetings. And by now, we are aware that there are some articles in the chair's text that enjoy a broader agreement, I would say. So, for instance, just transition enjoys an agreement. Articles on plastic waste management enjoy some amount of agreement. However, there are other articles. So, for instance, Article 3 on plastic products and chemicals of concern, Article 5 on the design of plastic products, Article 6 on supply or reduction of plastics, financing mechanisms, which was talked at length by Swati. And definitely there's then Article 20 on how do we move ahead from here. So if you actually look at it, this was also said earlier in the session today, and this is the principle that we are more or less operating on, that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed on, right? And that basically is kind of delaying a lot of things. So even if you look at the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, this committee had a mandate to adopt the rules of procedure, which basically talk about how will we arrive at decisions, right? So till now, after 5 meetings across the globe, across all the 5 continents, this committee has kind of not been able to agree on how will the committee make decisions, right? And this was supposed to happen back in INC 2, but that has not happened till now. And that basically brings us to why the progress has been really very slow in adopting certain decisions, and that is primarily because the rules of procedure or parts of it have not been adopted or have been deliberately kept out of the ambit of discussion at the committee. Now, even right now, the text that we have, the chair's text that we have, it proposes decision making by consensus. Now, what this primarily means is that if there are 180 countries in the negotiation room, even if one of them says that they do not agree to something, then everyone will start to uh, work on diluting the existing text, which will be acceptable to every member in the room. And this has in the past and possibly in the future, if this is the decision making mechanism that we follow, will constantly lead us to situations of deadlock, a very similar situation that the current treaty negotiation is in. Now, if you look at the history of multilateral environmental agreements, I'm not an expert, but from the community that we basically learned from, both voting and consensus have been misused, right? And there is precedence where consensus has been misused, where especially if you look at the BRS, the Basel Rotterdam Stockholm, and especially under the Rotterdam Convention, a handful of countries have been blocking the adoption of certain decisions, basically on the issue of prior informed consent of certain substances by using veto power, basically saying that one country in the room does not agree to what most agree on. And that's why, I mean, decisions that could have been taken in, let's say, a couple of years get dragged on for 5, 6, or maybe more years. And then we also have precedents from the UNFCCC framework, where time and again, a lot of people who have worked in these spaces have have called it that it's one of the multilateral environmental agreements that has failed to actually keep the 1.5-degree target that was earlier decided in check. And that basically happens because there is no provision for the confluence of parties to go to vote under any circumstances. So what that basically means that even if there is one objecting party in the committee or in the future conference of parties, there will be no progress, or there will be a very slow progress. And on the voting front, I mean, there are developing countries who have constantly claimed that there are regional economic centers which are economically aligned, and let's say you have some regional integration that is made up of, let's say, 20 countries, then will that vote count as one vote, or will it count as 20 separate votes? That also becomes a concern, especially for regions that are not economically aligned or have different circumstances. So in both these issues, just having decisions just by consensus or having decisions just by means of voting has kind of not worked in favor for everyone in the room. And that is why we have been, I mean, it does not currently feature in the chair's text, but there are proposals from a lot of countries that that basically say that we need a hybrid approach where decisions through consensus are the most preferred, but in case decisions are not being able to arrive on consensus, then there has to be a possibility for voting. And we have precedences from earlier multilateral environmental agreements which have actually shown a lot of progress in a very short span of time, just because uh, there is no country that is negotiating in bad faith, because they know that if we do not kind of come on the table and join the dialogue, then there is a possibility that there might be voting, and their plans might not turn out the way they wanted to. And very recently, even under the biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions, we saw a very similar model that was adopted. And this is also something that we believe is fair on all the parties who are negotiating on behalf of their people and the planet. So uh, it basically pressures both sides, both the ambitious sides as well as people who make it difficult for making progress. So what really is our expectation from INC 5.2 is that, given the limited amount of time, we know that it's one of the longest scheduled INC meetings that we have, close to 10 days. But we also know that there are certain issues that will face very strong pushbacks from a handful of countries, and a lot of decisions will have to be passed on to the future conference of parties. So in order to have a treaty that really has teeth, but at the same time is implementable, what we need is a strong conference of parties that can actually consider scientific evidence as we move ahead, and based on the emerging scientific evidence, actually establish subsidiary bodies that can report back and also help in development of annexes, development of reports, which can then be considered by the future COP. And then another thing that is very important to note, that the future COP should also have the ability to adopt protocols, again on the basis of any information as we move ahead comes to light. So this is really important. Not a lot of people are right now paying attention to this, but we need to have substantial amount of power that is delegated to the future COP in order to actually have a treaty that is implementable in the long run. So that's it, and I will hand it back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Siddharth. And with this, we conclude the first panel discussion. And I would like to request Swati to please moderate the second panel with the speakers. Over to you, Swati.
Thank you so much, Atin. And it was really an insightful discussion so far. In the next set, we look forward to hear from some stakeholders, some important stakeholders. What are their reflections, what they think about the treaty, how it will progress, and what's majorly at stake for them. So without wasting any time, I just have 20 minutes, so to say. I'll introduce the speakers. Atin, can you share the slides for each one of them as I sort of introduce them? Our first speaker is Dharmesh Shah. He's the consulting senior campaigner for CIEL in the environmental health program. Dharmesh's work has focused primarily on strategy, coordination, support, and mobilizing of the diverse coalitions and civil society organizations co-leading the efforts to deliver an effective global plastics treaty. Our next speaker is Madhyatil Hari Goena, and I'll call her Maddie for ease of communication. Maddie serves as the treasurer for IAWP, the International Alliance of Waste Pickers. She plays a crucial role in extended producer responsibility and has actively participated in Inc. 1 and Inc. 4 negotiations. Our next speaker is Tricia Farrelly. Professor Farrelly is the coordinator of the Scientists Coalition for an Effective Plastics Treaty. Tricia sat on the UN Scientific Advisory Committee for Plastics in 2018, and she's also a technical advisor to Pacific Island countries for the Plastics Treaty. And last but not the least, we have Ankit Gupta, who's the General Manager, Sustainability with ITC Limited. It's one of India's largest private sector enterprise, and Ankit has worked for over 15 years in the sustainability space, and his work involves steering ITC's sustainability strategy and goals in the areas of ESG, climate change, and nature. So a warm welcome to all of you, and I'll jump straight to the first question, which is common to all of you. And probably I'll ask Maddie to start with, which is, as we approach the resumed negotiations at Inc. 5.2, what is the one non-negotiable priority you believe must be safeguarded or advanced in the treaty? Over to you, Maddie.
Thank you very much, Swati, for having me here. From the start of the negotiations, the majority member states have strongly supported mandatory language in the Just Transition article, especially for indigenous people and waste speakers. And we see this as a recognition of value and rights of waste speakers. Unfortunately, in the chair's December's 1st text, which we understand it will be the basis negotiations for INC 5.2. The once mandatory Just Transition article was reduced to a voluntary provision. This renders that article ineffectual and disregarded the role of waste speakers in this treaty and in plastic management as a whole. And what we think is that the current text of Just Transition, that is Article 10, requires strengthening in the following ways to capture the demands and respect the rights of informal workers such as waste speaker group. Making human rights, including the rights of health and the rights of a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, the rights of indigenous peoples and waste speakers, and Just Transition, cross-cutting priority, and emphasize their specific relevance in the implementation of Article 10 on Just Transition. Replacing non-binding provision in paragraph 1, 2, and 3 with binding ones, and remove the mentioning take into account national circumstances and capability to avoid creating loopholes, and that would make the article mandatory. To retain a mentioning of ILO Just Transition Guidelines from the chair's statement paper, especially now that the reference of specific measures have been removed. And to guarantee that a just transition ensures safeguards for human health and the environment, upholding the United Nations Declaration on the rights of indigenous people, including the rights of free, prior, and informed consent, and respect the rights of the self-determination. Thank you.
Thank you, Maddie, for your very valuable insights and inputs. I would now move to Ankit Gupta, who represents industry. And Ankit, for you, what is the one non-negotiable priority you believe must be safeguarded or advanced in the treaty text? Over to you.
Thanks, Swati, and thanks to all the panelists for such an informative talk and introducing. I mean, as a business stakeholder, some of these things are not so common in the plastic conversations that we have within our industry peers. I mean, for me personally, because ITC as part of CII and the India Plastics Pact, we were fortunate enough to participate as an observer in INC, I think 3 and now in 5.2 also will be there as an observer. Instead of, I think all the sort of text and the sub-clauses are quite important. Earlier conversation on plastics was mostly around waste management and even packaging design. But these new concepts and new conversations around, let's say, chemicals of concern, the role of upstream players, this is all new. I think there are no existing frameworks for us to place businesses in our conversation on these issues. So if the treaty puts more light on these topics and puts forth a framework, for example, there is no way for a business to, do risk assessment that for plastics, for chemicals of concern, how do we understand risks across our value chain on these topics? So eventually, hopefully, the treaty would nudge or have a domino effect where such frameworks do get created. And I'm referring to a parallel with the climate conversation where even there you have so much of disagreement. That space is also rife with so much of controversy and disagreement. Yet, I think we have moved much faster post the Paris Agreement, which was, I guess, a milestone for all of us in that sense. So, for example, things like disclosure requirements. So for climate, now we have very robust disclosure requirements that have evolved over the last 4 or 5 years. Things like climate bonds, climate finance. The current climate finance taxonomies, while plastics is closely linked to nature, plastics, and water, it's usually a very supporting actor in those frameworks. How do we sort of bring it mainstream? Do we need a separate framework, or do we, make it more prominent in those existing framework itself? That's a very business relevant conversation that, as a business who takes sustainability very seriously, we're quite looking forward to how this will evolve, because if it means more disclosure requirements for us, we need to be prepared, and right now, I guess in very early stages of something like that evolving right now, but I'm very sure if hopefully this meeting, evolves into a more concrete language and more concrete signals to the entire ecosystem. And that's where I think things like a plastic finance taxonomy or, plastic disclosures could evolve and really nudge businesses to take, more sort of decisions which are in agreement with how the world thinks. And I think that's my larger expectation, that some harmonization, in the sense that even now we don't have answers to questions like, what is the role of recycling in solving this problem? What is the role of chemical recycling? I just heard different arguments on different sides. What is the role of, multiple things? So there's no, even recyclability is a fairly debated topic across the world right now. So can we harmonize these subjects so that we can have more standardized frameworks where business can act more concretely and show progress, or other stakeholders can judge business take, for example, in climate and let's say even ESG, there are ratings where businesses gets rated through different yardsticks. For plastics also, something has to involve which will sort of make it more performance driven, easy to monitor, and things like. So I'm as a business stakeholder, I'm very keen. I'm sorry to put a boring lens on on such an important topic, but things like tools and frameworks and harmonized definitions are very crucial for us to make progress. Yeah.
Thanks, Ankit, and also for highlighting some very important challenges that are there for the industries. For those of you who don't know, the India Plastics Pact is a CII-led consortium of 50 plus companies, if I'm not wrong, Ankit, that have quite a few targets to achieve in terms of utilizing more recyclable content and packaging to looking at more upstream solutions to plastics. And Ankit, please do share it in the link if you want to about it. Moving on to Tricia, who is the coordinator of the Scientists Coalition. Tricia, what is that one non-negotiable priority you believe must be safeguarded or advanced in the treaty text? Over to you.
Yeah, that's quite hard, that question actually, Swati, but I'm very pleased to be following from Ankit, because we could almost be singing from the same hymn book, so to speak, in terms of the need for globally harmonized criteria, standards, assessments, testing, reporting, and so on. And so I guess, I mean, for us, ideally, we've heard earlier about the need for primary plastic polymer reduction. That's absolutely key. But certainly when I'm listening to the other speakers as well, it's very much along the lines of what we're asking for here is the right experts at the table. And I'm talking about multiple stakeholders, Indigenous scientists, local knowledge holders, waste pickers, trained academics across all disciplines necessary to develop the criteria needed for these globally harmonized standards to make the work focused higher up the waste hierarchy at supply side around PPP production reduction. It's the primary plastic polymer production reduction targets perhaps, but also to ensure that all supply chain actors know what is in their plastic, what is their plastic, how can it be safely and sustainably handled, managed, used, consumed, disposed of at the end of its useful life. We don't know that yet, as Ankit so clearly explained. We don't have the international standards that are appropriate and fit for purpose, but we need the right people at the table in these science policy interfaces as subsidiary to the future treaty to enable that to happen. Without that, we're not going to get production reduction in the way that we need to have it to reduce contamination of environment and human beings. We need human health also. I haven't heard that very much in this conversation, but the human health impacts of plastics right from supply side needs to be really highlighted as alongside human rights, Indigenous rights, workers' rights, and so on. This just transition is very important. We've kind of lost, I think, a bit of traction on climate impacts in the last negotiations. I think we need to really claw that back and make sure that we are articulating this multilateral environmental agreement to be with other climate-related MEAs, but also biodiversity loss. So there's a number of things that are starting to drop off, I think, from the conversation as we move further and further towards the INC 5.2 in August. There's a lot of things that I want to speak to here, but just I guess because of lack of time, just to say that the Scientists Coalition have responded to key articles of the chair's text. We've published that, and I'll pop it into the link rather than sharing the slide. It's just for ease of access. These have been translated into Spanish and to French and also into English. And so you'll see our science-based responses to some of the key articles of the chair's text, including the kind of criteria we're looking for and the criteria to develop those standards, hazard-based safety criteria, sustainability criteria, essential use, and transparency, traceability, trackability. The right labelling is absolutely crucial, I think, for the treaty negotiations. Thank you very much. I'll pop that in the chat. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Thanks, Tricia, for highlighting these very important aspects. Going back to Dharmesh. Dharmesh, in what do you feel is the most non-negotiable priority that should be safeguarded or advanced in the treaty text? Over to you.
Thank you, Swati, and I'll be quick. No, there's a positive time. So thank you to the organizers for this important event, CSC, NIVA, and GRID-Arendal. So going after Swati and Ankit, I think I certainly like +1 to all the points that they made. Human rights, health, transparency and traceability, emissions and releases, which is Article 7, I think is also very important from the upstream perspective. How can we look at it, the emissions releases that's happening across the life cycle of plastics. But I think all of this ultimately ties down to the global production gap, which is what Tricia mentioned. I think from the civil society point of view and from the rights holders point of view, this is a major non-negotiable. And we're hoping that Article 6, which is right now under a lot of stress, there's a lot of disagreements over production reduction and global caps. But we know that more than 99% of the plastics are fossil fuel based. And if current trajectories hold, plastic production is expected to triple by 2050, locking an estimated about 1/3 of our remaining carbon budget of 1.5 degrees. So this is not a fringe concern. This is a central to our ability to achieve our climate goals under the Paris Agreement. So that climate element is completely missing right now, as Tricia mentioned. At the same time, the economics of the plastics and petrochemical sectors are also unraveling. Demand is stagnating. There's overcapacity. We're making too much plastic, and yet we're building more plants across the world. Countries are investing more and more in production facilities and projects. And many of them are in the pipeline up to 2027. There's about 1,000 more plants that are going to be built, if my research is correct on this. And this is not rational. This is a bubble. We don't know how this is going to play out. But economists are also warning that unless there's a cap on production now, this will only exacerbate the environmental and health harms that plastics are causing at this point. So the treaty must contain a production cap, national level production reduction obligations, not just a global ambition, not just nice words in the preamble, but measurable time-bound commitments, I think. Because we cannot afford a Paris-style agreement in the plastic context, at least.
Thanks, Dharmesh. While you're here and we move to the next set of very specific questions for our stakeholders, I'll start with you, Dharmesh. From your advocacy standpoint, what kind of accountability mechanisms are essential to ensure that the treaty is not just symbolic, but enforceable and effective? Over to you.
Thanks, Swati. Just want to start off by saying that we need to be honest about what we're trying to get here at the Plastics Treaty. No matter how efficient our waste management systems are, cleanups cannot be the key goal of this treaty, and which is where it's heading right now. This is heading into a treaty that is going to be focusing on waste management, and we need to ramp up ambition. And we cannot mop the floor while the tap is still running. So I think that real change, the real challenge here is not managing plastics better, but producing far less of it. So with that central concern in the background, I think how to make sure that this treaty actually works, and how do we build real accountability? The deepest concern for civil society is that unless the treaty is backed by strong systems that hold countries, the companies that are manufacturing this plastics responsible, it will fail to deliver a real change. So what are the few elements or pillars that we could look at? And some of it is also picking off on what Tricia mentioned already. But I think the most important is we need legally binding obligations. Voluntary measures so far have what brought us here. Treaty must commit countries to real action with deadlines, reporting duties, and real consequences for inaction. And then there needs to be independent oversight mechanisms, oversight bodies supported by real independent scientists and science Civil society has to have a role, has to have a role in the in this oversight mechanism. We need frontline perspectives, etc., to come in so that the monitoring and implementation of this of the treaty is robust. And then transparency has to be at the heart of it. Transparency in public reporting. So progress reports must be made public. They have to be accessible and standardized across countries, so people can actually see what's happening and not just what's promised. And we don't have that on a global level. Then, very important from civil society and rights holder point of view is meaningful public participation. Communities impacted by public plastic pollution, from fence line residents to informal workers, have to be able to shape decisions and challenge the violations. And participation cannot be tokenistic, it has to be empowering. So it has to be embedded within the treaty text, which is not window dressing. And last is the conflict of interest firewalls. And this is something very close to what CL does, is we've been monitoring the presence of lobbyists in every INC, and fossil fuel lobbyists have outnumbered country delegations in many of these INCs, and the number is only going up. And this is not just a concern of the plastics treaty, it's happening across the board, even in climate spaces. And that cannot continue. We need safeguards to prevent industry from weakening ambition and transparency on rules of participation. So I'll stop there, sorry. So I think we need a very important safeguards there and firewalls to make sure that industry is not running the show.
Thank you. Samesh, you mentioned industry, so I'll go back to Ankit. Ankit, how you think is the industry positioning itself with regard to obligations around primary polymers, product design, and financial contributions under the treaty? Over to you, and if you can kindly keep it brief.
I think in addition to the points that I already mentioned, things like in India, we have the EPR regime where it's largely credits and a few bans. In the EU, you have a different regime. They're also looking at recyclability in the next few years. And UK also, you have taxes and recyclability coming. From a business perspective, I think looking at what policy tools will be available, let's say for strengthening Indian regulations would be very key. Like, are we looking at, because right now design interventions are pretty much voluntary. The EPR regime does not, it's there in the preamble, but it doesn't really expect, it's really a trickle down expectation that businesses may change their packaging in response to EPR. Like India Plastics Pact, we've developed a lot of guidelines on flexible packaging, rigid packaging, what's right, what's wrong, what's acceptable. I think a larger, as I said, harmonization on these aspects is going to be very key if we need to shift, packaging design in a meaningful way, where we have a clear idea of, okay, maybe there are some transition solutions. You can't completely do away with packaging, in X number of years. What is the best solution available today? And then as innovation kicks in, where could we transition ahead? Similar to what's happening climate. There are solutions which are, seen as intermediary. In the next 5-10 years, you can't do anything else. So let's do that first, while there's more innovation that may come up in the years to come. On financing, I think as we are implementing EPR in India, we're realizing there's a lot of gap in terms of available capacities, even in terms of getting good quality, recycled plastic, if you want to reduce virgin plastic usage overall. It's extremely, low. I think the industry will not be able to comply with the current capacity that's there. So something which can attract capital into these solutions. As I said, the current climate finance taxonomy does not acknowledge circularity or plastics as a major theme. So how can we sort of bring that in here as well? In terms of upstream engagement, right now it's very scant. We do engage with upstream players on innovation and things like that. But as I said, there is no formal way for us to, and we don't go as upstream as the treaty goes. We don't look at really upstream players in our day-to-day engagement. So hopefully, as I said, with clear messaging and more concrete words, probably that will get established.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ankit. Tricia, what are some of the science-based recommendations that remain underutilized or poorly translated in the current text? And how can negotiators better engage with scientific input? Probably you would want to share from your experiences. Over to you.
Certainly, thank you. Well, there's a lot of things. I think I've mentioned a number of them before. I think something that I haven't mentioned though, which is extremely important, is to bring back and refocus and really ensure that plastic chemicals of concern remain in the text of the treaty. There are some arguments that this is sufficiently covered in other multilateral environmental agreements. And they most definitely are not, and certainly when we're talking about plastic chemicals along the full life cycle of plastic. So that's going to be something very important to also include, particularly with regards to human and environmental health, emissions, and so on and so forth. And we've talked about science policy interfaces. We need inclusive and representative science policy interfaces, and I'm really pleased to hear Damesh mention conflict of interest. That's very dear to the heart of the Scientists Coalition, to ensure that all processes, but particularly the science policy interfaces, are underpinned by a robust conflict of interest policy and mitigation process, transparency, inclusivity, and representation. So that's going to be very important. I've mentioned the criteria and also taking a full life cycle approach. From a scientific perspective, the full life cycle approach for plastics starts at extraction of the fossil fuels required to produce plastics that are intended for the production of plastics, but also the biomass intended for plastics alternatives. And we haven't really covered that very much yet, but I did see a question pop up around alternatives, I think, sort of biodegradables and so on. We need that criteria, safety, sustainability, and transparency, essential use for alternatives and substitutes to plastics as well, so that we can avoid regrettable substitutes and outcomes from that. Also, just we've been hearing a little bit about recycling of plastics. As the science grows, the more we find out that actually recycle plastics has the propensity to introduce more plastic chemicals of concern and microplastics into the environment, into workers, into consumers. So we're going to have to be very careful about how we increase recycled content and increase recycling, whilst also ensuring that we're adhering to the criteria around safety and sustainability as we would for any other stage of the full life cycle of plastics. We've produced a list of key definitions in response to the chair's text that may also be of interest to those who are viewing the panel today, and that's in the link I've popped in the chat there. I think that there's a number of other things in there that I've probably already mentioned, but others have mentioned sustainable production and consumption, and an adaptive list of groupings of plastic chemicals, products of concern in the annex of the treaty. Very quickly, in response to your question about how to get this information out to negotiators, we do this through many bilaterals with countries. We have our relationship leads within the coalition. If anybody here is a negotiator and wants us to contact you with our responses to the science of the negotiations as things continue to move forward, we'd be very, very happy to hear from you and make sure you have an open line to the scientists who have the expertise that you need. We're also available on the ground at all INCs. We give seminars and presentations and so on as well. So everything that we produce is open access to everybody, and we try to translate our outputs, which are very brief policy briefs and fact sheets mostly, into as many languages as we have the expertise and capability to do so.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Tricia. And last but not the least, Maddie, and probably just in a minute, if you could respond to how do you feel and in what ways you feel the current treaty negotiations acknowledge or overlook the rights, roles, and contributions of informal waste workers, and how is the International Association for Waste Pickers getting up for Inc. 5.2? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Shati. The treaty has to recognize first the contribution of waste pickers in the plastic value chain. That's why we think they are overlooking. That's why we think that the finance mechanism for the treaty must include the provision of financing a just transition. Elsewhere, we know that if it's not like that, the just transition will not materialize. We especially advocate for a new independent and adequate resourced global fund to be established as a part of mechanism, and that these funds focus on ensuring efficient access through simplified procedures with a substantial portion set aside to meet the needs of waste pickers and other affected workers in the informal and cooperative setting. We also are also given the centrality of waste pickers, not just in the plastic treat process, but in the plastic management system in general. We call for inclusion of waste pickers in the preamble. We urge the inclusion of the clear definition of waste pickers in the forthcoming legal instrument and address plastic pollution. And either in the definition section, annexure, or within any future guidelines developed under this legal framework. Another thing that we think that the plastic treaty need to consider is that the people who are the producers and industries, they need to be responsible for the production. We are working as a waste pickers to collect and make sure that we put the bread on our table. But we are not responsible for non-value plastic. We cannot pick it up. We have to make sure that we pick the plastic that is valuable for us. That's why when we say a reduction of plastic, we mean the one that is non-value, the one that is toxic. That's the one that we say the treaty should make sure that it's not produced. And they need to make sure that there are bylaws that enforces the production to be reduced by the people who are responsible. And the EPR policies need to make sure that waste pickers does benefit from the incentives that they're giving out. Because for us to go out there and pick up the material of plastic, it's not like it's a must, we are responsible, but we make sure that we feed our families and to make sure that the environment that we're staying around is clean. So to be honest, if you can see in our areas where there's no waste picking, you'll find out that there's a lot of blockages in the drains because plastic is lying around. But where waste pickers are there, they make sure that they collect the plastic and make sure that they recycle, and they do have the contribution in the plastic value chain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maddie. And I really wish I could continue this for another 15 minutes, but unfortunately, I will have to hand it over to Siddharth. But thank you so much to all the stakeholders and speakers. Over to you, Siddharth.
Yeah, thank you so much, Swati. I mean, it was a very good discussion. What we try to do is look at what are some of the most contested issues, some that enjoy convergence, some that have still a lot of work to do, and that's something that we will see through the first week of INC 5.2 at Geneva. Unfortunately, we do not have a lot of time for answering the questions that we have received in the Q&A, but what we promise to do is we have all of these saved. So post the webinar, and we also have all of your email IDs. So post the webinar, we can draft responses for each of these. We can also reach out to the experts in case we need their interventions with any of these questions, and we will try to get back to you, let's say by the end of this week, with all the questions, with all the answers to the questions that you asked. I hope that is fine. I really apologize for that. However, we also want to leave you with the thought that this is just one of the first webinars that we are doing under a series of webinars. We planned 3. The next one is next week, Tuesday, where we will be releasing our global plastic position report, where we basically follow all the in-session submissions by member states, and we try to kind of put it up on a map so that easy for both observers as well as negotiators and delegations to follow each of these articles without violating the Chatham House rules. And we are also running a campaign. It's called Planet Over Plastics. And please do keep following CSE webpage and our social media for engaging with all of those. And my colleague Sukanya has kind of put a few links, so you can also explore those. On that note, I thank all the speakers, all the panelists, and definitely all the participants who kind of stayed with us through the 90 minutes. And I hope that you found value in the discussions that we had today. And we will continue to feed in and bring more information to you from experts and our community so that you are up to date with what's happening in this space. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.